There is a moment, deep in this story, when a boy's heart stops. He is 17 years old. There are nearly 400 people around him, students, teachers, the girl he's been pretending not to care about, and he stops his own heart deliberately, because a living body cannot move at the speed he needs to move. He saves every one of them. His heart stays stopped for more than a week. There is another moment, stranger than that one, when that same boy floats in a space, with no floor and no air and no light source, face to face with something that calls itself a god. The being tells him there is no way back. He looks at her and says calmly that she is lying. He is correct. Both moments were waiting for him from the beginning. To understand how a boy who arrives at the continent's greatest magic institution, unable to cast a single spell, gets to either of them, you have to go further back than the academy. Further back than the city. You have to go to a forest clearing on the edge of a kingdom most people couldn't find on a map, and a woodcutter walking home just before dark, and a sound coming from the underbrush that takes him a moment to identify. It is a baby. Left under a bush, wrapped in plain cloth, alive but cold. No note, no footprints leading away, or none that the failing light shows him. Vincent stands with his torch and looks at the infant for a few seconds, then at the path home, then at the infant again. He picks the child up and carries him the rest of the way. His wife opens the door and reads the situation immediately. She steps aside to let both of them in. They name the boy Cyron. Growing up in that forest village, Cyron is the kind of child who watches things. He studies his father's axe work, not the strength of it, the geometry. The way the blade travels, and where the wood gives, along a hidden grain that only shows when you know to look. He memorizes the path to market by landmark, so he can navigate home on overcast days. He learns the names of trees, not from any book, but from noticing which ones his father avoids and which ones he doesn't. He knows he was found. He has known this since he was old enough to understand what the older children in the village mean when they say certain things just loud enough for him to hear. The knowledge lives somewhere behind his sternum, not always painful, but never absent either. A question with no one to properly answer it. Whether there was something wrong with him, whether there was a reason. Vincent answers that question without ever being asked, and without making a speech about it. He just does things. When Cyron turns 11 and grows 3 inches in 4 months, and his clothes don't fit, Vincent sells the hunting bow he's carried since before Cyron was born. He tells Cyron the bow was getting old anyway. The bow was in perfect condition. Cyron knows this because he's the one who oiled it. He says nothing, and wears the new coat through 2 winters, until the seams split. The magic comes at 8 years old, during firewood hauling. Cyron reaches for a bundle twice his weight and cannot budge it. He pushes harder. His arms shake. The bundle sits completely still, but the air above it shudders, and a sharp gust sweeps through the shed, scattering kindling from the basket by the door, and spinning dust in a brief tight spiral. Both of them freeze. Vincent puts down what he's carrying and looks at his son, then at the shed, then at the scattered kindling. He says, after a long beat, that they should probably talk to somebody about that. The somebody they find doesn't come right away. What comes first is work. A contact passes along an offer through the household's limited city connections. A noble family needs someone to sort a private library. 3 floors, mostly uncatalogued. The pay is modest. The rules are explicit. Stay invisible, stay in the library, never be seen by the family's main members. Cyron is 15 when he starts. House Ogent is old money, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Their library is staggering, more books than Cyron has seen in his entire life, stacked floor to ceiling in gorgeous disorder, half the volumes still in the crates they were shipped in years ago. He builds a shelving system across the first week. Then he starts reading while he sorts. He reads history, military records, philosophy texts that argue with each other across centuries, botanical catalogs that go into more detail about root systems than anyone in his village would believe necessary, and scattered throughout the upper floor, in bindings thicker than his forearm, volumes of magical theory, so dense that a single page can take an hour to follow properly. He works through all of it, slowly, and when he runs out of shelf space, he catalogs from memory and starts over. He manages 2 months before anyone in the family finds him. Ryan Ogent is the second son of the house, 16 years old. With the expression of someone who has known for a long time that second son in this family means something specific and not particularly flattering. He wanders in looking for a military history record and finds instead a commoner sitting cross-legged on the floor with a heel of bread balanced on his knee, reading a treatise on dimensional spatial theory. He demands to know who Siron is. Siron explains. Ryan challenges him to a sword duel. They fight the next morning in the back courtyard. Ryan is formally trained, clean footwork, proper guard positions, the kind of technique that works well against other formally trained opponents, because everyone in the academy knows the same base language. Siron fights the way his father splits knotted logs, diagonal, aimed at the point where the structure gives, rather than the point that looks exposed. It's unorthodox enough to be disorienting. Ryan's third counter lands on empty air, and he goes down. He stares at the sky. Then he laughs. A real one, open and slightly surprised. The laugh of someone who has just found something they weren't expecting. He gets up, brushes off his coat, and says that was a decent technique. No resentment in it, not a trace. Ryan comes back the next day, and the day after. He brings flatbread sometimes, still warm, which he sets on the corner of whatever surface is nearby without making it an offer or a gesture. Just leaves it there, available. Siron eats it without comment. Their conversations go long. The history of the kingdom's border disputes, what Ryan actually thinks about his older brother, the philosophical difference between a soldier and a mage, and which one has more real power in the world's current political arrangement. Ryan is opinionated in ways that haven't been filtered yet. Siron finds he doesn't mind this. When the head of House Ogent discovers the friendship, the reaction is swift and cold. The patriarch is the kind of man who understands the world as structure, and structure requires clear lines between those who belong inside the house and those who exist outside it. He has the guards bring Siron to the Great Hall and gives an order, in the flat tone of someone accustomed to obedience, to resolve the commoner problem in a manner that would prevent it from recurring. Ryan arrives before anything happens. He stands in the doorway. He looks at his father. He speaks in the formal cadence the Ogent family uses for binding declarations, which means everyone in the room recognizes exactly what he is doing, and he says that if this is how the house handles its affairs, then the house does not have his loyalty. The silence that follows has weight to it. The family patriarch looks at his son for a long moment. His son does not look away or adjust his expression. The family grandfather steps forward from the hallway, where he has apparently been watching long enough to have formed a verdict. He pronounces, with the dry air of someone closing a wager, that the commoner is to remain, and that Ryan's declaration, made in front of witnesses in the formal register, stands as an oath. Ryan comes to Siron afterward and extends his hand. He says he would like to be Siron's sword, his shield, whatever it needs to look like. Siron takes his hand. He has no formal words for this. The grip is sufficient. House Ogent's sponsorship creates a path. Alphys Magic Academy, the continent's most prestigious institution, the one all serious mages point their lives toward, does not admit commoners by rule, but a legal architecture exists for students under formal noble protection, and the Ogent family's endorsement satisfies it. Technically, even if the arrangement was designed for ward children and cousins, rather than a woodcutter's adopted son. The headmaster, Alphys himself, agrees to the arrangement with one condition. Siron must pass the entrance examination. When the full terms are explained to Siron, one part of it catches. The sponsorship is framed as an informal adoption, a name exchange that would place him within the Ogent line. He declines this without hesitation and without needing to think about it. He is grateful. He also knows exactly whose son he is, and his name is not something he's willing to swap out for an easier door. He enters the academy as Siron, his father's son. The entrance examination is held in a large hall with a measuring instrument at its center. Students approach one at a time and enter the spirit zone, the meditative inner state through which mages connect to their magical capacity, while instructors note the size and density on instruments calibrated to predict academic ceiling. Most students achieve a few seconds of clarity, register their number, and step back. The marking table on the instructor's desk has the class ranges printed in red. Siron steps to the center. He closes his eyes. He has been finding this state since he was 8 years old, though he never had a name for it. He finds it now, the way you find a room in your own house in darkness, by familiarity. Without searching, the instrument gauge climbs. The instructor watching it puts her pen down and does not pick it up again. The needle passes the Class 7 threshold, then Class 6, then the point where she normally calls time. Siron is still standing there with his eyes closed, breathing without effort, not pressing or straining. The other students waiting their turn have stopped talking. He is assigned to Class 7 and told he may begin next term. He cannot cast a single spell. Here is what the examiners understood from those instruments, and what his future classmates will never work out from watching him sit motionless in practical sessions. The spirit zone is not a technique. It is the ground that every technique is built on. A shallow, narrow zone sets a ceiling. The spells that can be layered on top of it are limited by what it can support. A vast, dense zone is different. It can bear almost anything. The structure that eventually goes on top of it is purely a matter of what gets built there, and building takes time. Siron's zone is larger than any student these examiners have measured in the last decade. The viewer knows this. The students in Class 7 do not. What the class sees is a commoner sitting quietly with his eyes closed, while everyone around him releases fire and wind and compressed water from their hands. What they see is a boy with no lineage, no technique, and, according to a rumor that circulates by the end of the first week, a personal arrangement with Amy Karmas as his only real academic connection. Amy is in Class 4. She has a crimson tint in her left eye that functions as a near-perfect memory archive, cataloging everything it observes. She is not involved with Siron. She makes this emphatically clear through the specific, precise coldness she deploys whenever they share observable space, which does not stop the rumor and may have made it considerably more interesting to the people spreading it. Siron ignores the rumor. He attends class, enters his spirit zone in the practicals, and studies the theoretical architecture of spells he cannot yet execute. The Class 6 students above him watch this for 4 weeks and decide they've seen enough. The promotion exam they arrange is structured to look like a standard advancement test. It is not standard. It is a teleportation trial, positioned above a cliff face, with a drop of several hundred meters to bare rock. The mechanism is simple. A student who cannot teleport cannot complete it. A student who cannot complete it falls. The reasoning is clean. The commoner cannot cast spells. The cliff will confirm what the class already knows. Nate is the one who tells Siron about it. Nate is in Class 6, easy-mannered and surprisingly well-informed about things he has no obvious reason to know. He sits across from Siron at breakfast one morning and explains the situation with the cheerful clarity of someone who finds the whole thing more interesting than threatening. Siron spends 3 weeks on teleportation mathematics. Not the casting, the coordinates, the spatial displacement calculations, the speed thresholds, the geometry of moving from one precise point to another without losing parts of yourself in the gap between. He has no access to formal practice space, so he runs the numbers in his journal, the same one he's kept since the Ogent library days, until the formula is as natural as counting steps. The morning of the exam, he looks at the cliff. He checks the numbers once more, quietly, to himself. Then he jumps. He lands on the far side. The organizers from Class 6 exchange a look. The exam continues, student by student. Most pass, some barely. Halfway through, Mark, the boy who has been leading the quiet, consistent campaign against Siron's presence since week 1, misjudges his arc, not by much. Enough. He doesn't land. His hands catch the edge for 1 second, his fingers slip, and then he is falling, and the cliff below is entirely real. Siron is running the calculation before his body is fully moving. The distance, the velocity, the coordinate, not where Mark is right now, but where Mark will be in the next fraction of a second. He teleports to that second point and arrives there with his arms out, and Mark hits him instead of the ground. They land on the exam platform hard. Siron's knees take the impact first, both of them, and the stone is unforgiving. They stop. Mark stares at him. The contempt that has been sitting on Mark's face since week 1 is gone. Whatever expression replaces it, Mark has never worn it before. The instructors across the platform say nothing at all. Mark does not apologize that day. Siron doesn't wait for it. But after the results go up with his name at the top, the active contempt from Class 7 simply stops. Not warmly, not suddenly, but completely. The particular energy of wanting him gone drains out of the room like water from a crack, and the classroom becomes merely cold rather than hostile. He is promoted to Class 6 within the week. That evening, he lies on his cot without eating and stares at the ceiling until the lamp oil runs low. His hands shook on the platform. He hasn't told anyone that. The calculation he ran mid-air was correct. But between identifying the problem and executing the teleport, there was a fraction of a second where he wasn't completely sure. He is not untouchable. He is good at math and willing to jump, and those two things carry you only as far as the precision holds. He tucks his journal under the pillow. Old habit. Vincent used to say you remember the things you decide are worth protecting. The Supernatural Research Club forms in his second month in Class 6. Nate proposes it, mostly because every student above a certain level needs club affiliation, and the available options don't suit either of them. Aruki joins without being properly invited. He simply appears at the first organizational meeting and begins filling in the registration paperwork, which settles the question of whether he's serious. Aruki is in Class 5. He has a condition that makes standard social exchange difficult, but it does absolutely nothing to his mathematical ability, which is extraordinary even by academy standards. He knows this. He holds the knowledge the way some people hold a weapon, not brandished, just present. He initially views Siron as an anomaly worth investigating, rather than a person worth knowing, which is still more engagement than he offers most people. He had challenged Siron to a counting duel in the Spirit Zone weeks earlier, a speed test of the sequential method, the rapid mental count that sharpens the zone's focus. Aruki's father had told him stories about the immortal function, the theoretical state beyond numbers, and Aruki has been working toward it for years. He expected to demonstrate the gap between a Class 5 savant and a Class 6 commoner cleanly. Siron kept pace. Then, by a margin narrow enough that Aruki checked his own count 3 times before accepting the result, Siron finished ahead. Aruki said 3 words, conceded, and left. He returned the next morning to point out an inefficiency in Siron's counting interval technique. He explained it without being asked. Siron listened. Something began between them that would take months to fully name. The club's academic proposal is reviewed by the committee and almost immediately flagged as insufficiently rigorous. They are given a single presentation before the decision is made. They build a ghost. Not a real one, a construction of light manipulation, directional sound technique, and Aruki's mathematical precision, all calibrated to produce in a darkened presentation room the visual and auditory signature of a genuinely unexplained phenomenon. The argument is that a magic institution ought to document and study anomalous events seriously, and if 3 students can produce something that fools trained instructors, they've at minimum proved the methodology. The committee is fooled. After the committee files out, Siron sits down on the floor of their small borrowed room. Nate is laughing loudly enough to rattle the door. Aruki is making notes in his margin with the expression of someone who predicted this outcome but is gratified to have it confirmed. Siron puts his back against the wall and lets the relief move through him slowly. He has been at this academy for 2 months. He has been mocked, sabotaged, nearly thrown off a cliff by a rigged exam, and spent most of his time being quietly dismissed by people who saw only a commoner who couldn't cast spells. He has found, in a small borrowed room, a boy who knows everything and doesn't filter it, and a mathematician who respects only precision and has somehow decided Siron qualifies. This is not yet safety, but it is something worth protecting. The summer break comes 3 months later. Siron packs his bag the night before term ends and is at the city gate before the morning light is fully up. The road home takes 2 days on foot. He hasn't told his father exactly when to expect him, partly because letters from the academy take a week, and partly because he wanted to leave when he was ready, rather than when he'd promised. He spends the first night at a way station and reaches the forest by midday on the second, finding every tree he memorized as a child still standing where he left it. Vincent is splitting wood in the yard when Siron comes through the tree line. He doesn't stop working immediately. He finishes the swing, sets the piece aside, and then turns. He looks at his son the way he looks at things he wants to make sure are real, steadily, without rushing toward anything. Then he puts the axe down, wipes his hands on his trousers, and says Siron has gotten taller. Siron says he has been told that. Vincent goes inside to put water on. They eat together that evening, a pot of stewed venison his mother has been holding since she heard he was coming, with bread baked that morning and dried herbs from the window shelf that have been there since Siron was 8. He tells them about the exam, the club, the cliff, and Mark, though he leaves out the detail about his hands. His mother asks questions in clusters of 3. His father asks none, and listens to every word. Around the second bowl, with the fire up and the forest completely quiet outside, the specific knot behind Siron's shoulders, that has been there since the first week at the academy, finally comes loose. He stays 3 weeks. Ryan is at a training estate outside the city. Under a private combat instructor he's hired with money from a discretionary fund his father doesn't know the full use of. He is committed entirely to the path the oath implied. If he declared himself Siron's sword, he intends to be worth using. The instructor communicates primarily through corrections issued at speed. Ryan has adapted to this with the dogged cheerfulness that Siron is beginning to understand is not a performance, but simply how Ryan Ogent is built. When Siron visits, Ryan is mid-set and does not stop. He finishes the full sequence, wipes his face on his sleeve, and punches Siron lightly on the shoulder by way of greeting. No ceremony. They eat in the training yard because Ryan doesn't want to go inside and deal with the household's head butler, who has opinions about Ryan's career decisions. The food is from the kitchen anyway, and it's good. The conversation covers Ryan's older brother, who has decided swordsmanship is beneath an Ogent heir. Fine by Ryan, he says, because it means fewer dinners where he has to agree with the man about things. Siron tells him about Aruki. Ryan finds the counting duel story genuinely funny, which is a fair response. Before Siron leaves, Ryan mentions he'll be at the Academy's affiliated swordsmanship school next term. Different building, same campus. Siron says that's good news. He means it more than is convenient to say aloud, and Ryan's expression suggests he knows this, and neither of them does anything with that information. The meeting with Amy's family happens at the end of summer, and nothing Siron has read in the Ogent Library's 3 floors of historical documentation prepared him for the Karma's household. House Ogent is old money in the restrained sense. A library that speaks for itself, silence, treated as a form of authority. The Karma's family is the kind of wealth that is actively, enthusiastically, and at considerable volume delighted to exist. Their estate takes 5 minutes to walk from the gate to the front door. The entrance hall has flower arrangements taller than most people Siron knows personally. Amy's father greets him at the entrance, with the energy of a man who has been thinking about this moment since he first heard Siron's name, and found it interesting. Within 3 minutes, Amy's mother has asked him whether he prefers sweet or savory for breakfast, and written down his answer. He is not entirely certain why. He answers honestly anyway. The arrangement that Siron and Amy built between them, maintaining the rumor's surface rather than fighting it, a mutual shield against more targeted gossip, functions smoothly in an academy setting. At school, it means controlled coldness in observable space. At the Karma's dinner table, it means sitting across from 2 people who are warmly and openly delighted about a situation that has been, until now, entirely fictional. While Amy's father discusses the future and her mother refills Siron's tea at intervals too short to be a social convention. Amy, across the table, has the specific expression of a person calculating whether it is structurally possible to exit through a chair. Siron answers every question truthfully. He is technically not confirming anything. He is also technically not denying anything, which he begins to understand is a distinction with consequences. Her younger siblings find the whole situation magnificent and say so directly, which is the most honest thing that happens at the dinner. What no one in that room knows, what won't come clear until much later, is that Amy and Siron have been in the same space once before. Years ago, in a city street, when they were both young enough to remember feelings more clearly than faces, Amy did something that day she has never fully forgiven herself for, aimed at a child she didn't know. Siron was that child, and carried the particular sting of it for longer than he'd admit. They sit across from each other, making careful conversation about magic theory and family history, neither one knowing the other was there. The viewer knows. They do not. This gap is going to matter. Something shifts between them on the walk back from the estate. Not a declaration. Amy says something unguarded about her family, about how they get louder when they're happy, and how she's stopped being sure whether that's comforting or exhausting, and how she's never said that to anyone before. She closes her mouth the way people do when they realize they've said more than they meant to. Siron doesn't make anything of it. He responds to what she actually said, because that is clearly what she needs, and they walk the rest of the way in a quiet that has a different texture than the silences between them before. He doesn't examine this too closely. He puts it alongside the afternoon in Ryan's training yard, the kind of thing that means something real without needing a name yet. The new term brings a class promotion. Siron is in Class 5. The Spirit Zone training with Aruki becomes a fixed rhythm. Early mornings, twice weekly, always competitive, always close, always arriving slightly past wherever they stopped the previous time. Aruki has stopped framing it as a rivalry and started framing it as research. This is, for Aruki, essentially the same as affection. The trouble starts in the coffee-serving rotation. Every student above a certain class level carries a service assignment, a weekly shift in the academy's common hall, pouring drinks and clearing tables, designed to remind students that rank is earned rather than owed. Most treat it as scheduling noise. Siron treats it as scheduling noise. A group organized loosely around a student named Jake treats it as an opportunity. Jake has been at the top of every hierarchy he's occupied since childhood, and he maintains that position the way territorial creatures maintain territory, constantly, and with unambiguous consequences for anyone who challenges it. He has gathered around him a cluster of students with access to techniques that aren't in the official curriculum, sourced through channels the Academy's ethics committee would find interesting. They call themselves the Black Mages, with the self-assurance of people who have never been seriously opposed. They start with small humiliations, targeted, repeatable, designed to degrade rather than leave a mark. Amy draws their attention because she is brilliant and visible, and brilliance in someone Jake has categorized as below him reads as an insult that needs managing. Siren hears the escalation is coming through Nate, who has an inexplicable gift for knowing about trouble before it announces itself. He hears it late. By the time he reaches the East Corridor, it has gone past humiliation. Jake's group has been introducing anti-magic into the space around Amy, a substance that disrupts a mage's spirit zone from within, fragmenting the internal focus that all casting depends on. Used carefully, it weakens. Used with intent, and in a confined corridor with no exit, it does lasting damage. Amy's zone is suppressed, her crimson left eye's memory capacity interrupted. She is standing very still, the way people stand when they are measuring the exact distance between where they are and somewhere much worse. Siron picks up a wooden practice rod from the training rack outside the corridor on his way in. He knows he can't stop 5 people with restricted techniques through conventional response. He goes in anyway, because there is an alternative he discovered about himself during the entrance examination. A structural fact about his zone that he has spent the intervening months beginning to understand. His spirit zone is not a narrow, concentrated beam that anti-magic can target cleanly. It is vast and distributed across an area wider than the interference is designed to cover. Anti-magic works by overwhelming the focal point. His zone doesn't have one. He walks into the field. The pressure lands immediately, pulling from inside the chest rather than outside the body, the specific discomfort of something reaching into your center and pushing back. His zone compresses under it. He feels the resistance genuinely. He keeps walking. Jake's group stops, because this is not the expected result. The calculation they've been running, disruption dosage against a standard zone, does not account for a target whose zone absorbs the same dose across a surface area the technique wasn't built to cover. The substance is doing what it was designed to do. It isn't enough. Siron gets Amy out. He positions himself between her and the group until 2 senior teachers arrive from 2 floors above, drawn by the kind of disruption that echoes differently from regular corridor noise. What follows is institutional and swift. Jake's group appears before the disciplinary board the following morning. The restricted techniques, the anti-magic access, the full documented record of what they'd been doing and what they did that evening, all of it examined and ruled on in open session. Jake is not expelled. What happens to him is, in certain ways, worse. His self-mythology, the hierarchy, the entitlement, the performance of power, is taken apart in front of the people he performed it for. He makes an apology to Amy at the proceedings, a real one, the kind that costs the person giving it something they don't get back. She accepts it, which takes more precision of character than most people in the room recognize. Siron is not there for the apology. He is in the infirmary for 2 hours, letting the medical staff check whether the anti-magic exposure left residue in his zone. It hasn't. His zone absorbed it entirely. The medical instructor makes a note. Siron finds out about the note a week later, when Athela calls him in for a private review of his diagnostics. She looks at the readings for a long time before she says anything. Then she tells him his zone is rare, not just in scale but in structure. The density and the distribution together match a theoretical category she has encountered in exactly 3 academic sources, all of them at least a century old, and one of them marked restricted. She doesn't use the specific term yet. She tells him to keep training and to be careful with himself. He turns over the exact phrasing afterward. Be careful with himself. Not with others, not with his studies, with himself, specifically. He writes the phrase in his journal and doesn't show it to anyone. What Athela does not tell him, because she is still deciding how to, is that the structural category his zone matches is associated with something the older sources call the immortal function. The theoretical endpoint of the sequential method, not the highest count, not the densest possible zone, but the state beyond all of that, where the mage steps past the counting itself, into a domain that no instrument can measure. 2 of her 3 sources describe it in neutral academic language. The third notes, in a footnote written in a different hand than the rest of the text, that of the mages historically suspected to have reached it, the majority left no further record of any kind. She files this in the part of her mind reserved for things she is watching carefully, hoping not to need urgently. She is going to need it urgently. Arcane has been in a prison cell for 40 years. His real name is Bilto, but reputation in the mage world outlasts the name on the registry, and Arcane is the name that still means something. Before his arrest, he was considered one of the sharpest theoretical minds on the continent, a researcher whose work on memory transfer and spatial manipulation was decades ahead of what the academies could follow. His greatest student was a young man named Alphys, brilliant and devoted, who believed in the work the way young people believe in the person who taught them how to see. The experiment that ended everything was meant to save a life. Arcane's wife was dying of something neither medicine nor standard magic could reach. The only pathway he could devise was a memory transfer, moving the essential architecture of a person from a failing vessel to a new one. The technique was forbidden, and the Academy's ethics board had written clear documentation about why. Arcane read the documentation and judged the reasoning acceptable to discard. He brought Alphys in because he trusted him completely. Because Alphys was his student, his proof, his best argument that the work was worth doing. The experiment failed. His wife died in a way that was worse than the illness. Something broke in Alphys that night, not his loyalty, but his capacity to hold the work and the grief in the same hands. He destroyed everything, every document, every result, every formula they had developed together across years of shared research, gone in an hour of flames. And then he left. He walked away from Arcane, from the mentorship, from the decade of trust, and did not look back. Arcane was arrested on the charge of the forbidden experiment. There was no one to advocate for him, because the one person who knew the full truth of what they'd attempted together had just burned the evidence and disappeared. He spent 4 decades in that cell, and he did not spend them forgetting. By the time he walks out, he has 2 people with him, Canis and Aaron, young mages he found years before his imprisonment and raised as his own. His found family, assembled the way Alphys assembled his academy and his students, and his carefully managed legacy. Canis is sharp and dangerous and completely loyal. Aaron is quieter, more watchful. Both of them love the old man in the way people love someone who was there when there was nothing else. He escapes on a Tuesday, in the dead hours before the prison's magic suppression cycle's back online. The guards who investigate the empty cell find his breakfast untouched and the room otherwise undisturbed, as if he had made a decision and the building simply agreed with it. The Academy is not immediately notified. This is a mistake with significant consequences. The first sign something is wrong arrives 2 weeks later, in the form of a teacher who does not come to morning class. Then another. By midday, students are reporting gaps. An hour they can't account for, a walk they took without deciding to start it, a route they followed without recognizing they were following it. Cyron wakes up that morning to his club room exactly as he left it the previous night. Nate is asleep on the study couch, which is slightly unusual but not by itself alarming. Aruki is standing at the window watching the courtyard below with the expression of someone who has already completed an analysis and is not happy with the result. He tells Cyron to look at the students crossing the courtyard. Cyron looks. The students are moving in straight lines, not the organic straight lines of people who happen to be heading the same direction, mechanical ones, uniform, without deviation, without the random social clustering that normally gives a courtyard its texture. Every person is taking the same path at the same pace, and the path leads toward the academy's main bridge. Something is directing them. Aruki says, without raising his voice, that he noticed the pattern by the sixth student. He says this the way he says most things, as information, but the jaw muscles are tight. Siron checks the door, locked from outside. He checks his spirit zone, intact. Whatever the mechanism is, it hasn't reached this room. He breaks the door and starts moving. The mind control radiates from a single source. Aruki works this out from the geometry of the students' movement. By the time they reach the second floor landing, the trajectories are convergent, all pulling toward one fixed point, the bridge. The Academy's uncrossable bridge spans the central courtyard at its narrowest point. The name is formal. It refers to a property of the structure's magic, not its architecture. Today, it functions as a holding area. Hundreds of students stand along its length, and on the stone below, glassy-eyed and uniformly still, breathing in the synchronized way of people whose volition has been temporarily redirected. They are not harmed. This is deliberate. Arcane is not making a point about collateral damage. He is demonstrating, to an audience of one, what a mage of his ability can hold simultaneously. He wants the headmaster to arrive understanding the full scope of the situation before a word is exchanged. Siron and Aruki reach the lower corridor and find two people standing in it. Canis is older by several years, lean in the way of someone whose body has been put to consistent hard use. He cracks the knuckles of his left hand, one at a time, unhurried, then looks at the two of them with the mild interest of someone deciding which problem to address first. Aaron stands slightly behind him and to the left, watchful, with the quality of a person waiting to see what's necessary rather than what's quick. They are Arcane's children in every sense that matters. Aruki steps forward before Siron can, which is a surprise. He says, to Canis directly, that this confrontation changes nothing about whatever Arcane is planning, and that blocking two additional students from the bridge is an inefficient use of everyone's time. He says this in the same tone he uses for magic theory. Not cold, just exact. Canis smiles and hits him. What follows is not a clean exchange. Canis fights with a third party, something Siron will later identify as Jav, a shadow entity tethered to him, a separate consciousness moving from angles a single body shouldn't own. Aruki, caught off guard by the first hit, adjusts by the second exchange and begins responding to Jav's patterns with the focused patience of someone solving a live problem rather than a written one. He is slower than Canis. He is considerably more methodical. Siron takes Aaron. Aaron's technique borrows from photonization, light speed adjacent displacement, slipping between positions rather than striking through them. Siron has never faced this moving. He reads the displacement arcs the way he read teleportation mathematics in his journal months ago, by finding the constants underneath the motion, the fixed points in the pattern that have to hold regardless of speed. He takes two hard hits while he's finding them. Then he finds them. The corridor fight is loud and not long. Neither side wins cleanly. Siron and Aruki get past. Nate has arrived at the bridge ahead of them through a different route. Once Caesar, he is standing at the edge of it, not crossing, watching the gathered students with his easy expression pulled tight at the corners. He tells them, still watching, that he counted 412 students and 31 teaching staff. None of them respond to being called by name. Arcane stands at the far end of the bridge with his arms at his sides. He is old in the manner of powerful things, not frail, not softened, but stripped to essentials. The magic he's sustaining across 400 bodies is invisible, which makes it more alarming. He looks at Siren and the others with mild curiosity. He is waiting for Alphys. Alphys arrives 8 minutes later from the headmaster's tower, walking across the courtyard with the same unhurried deliberateness he brings to everything. When he looks up and sees Arcane standing above his students, his face shows something that is not surprise. The two men look at each other. Whatever exists between them, 4 decades of prison, a wife's death, burned research, a boy who became the Academy's head, while the man who taught him was left to answer alone, lives in that silence in a way that compresses time. The students along the bridge cannot observe their faces clearly. Siran, from 40 meters away, can. Arcane speaks first. What he wants is not complicated. He wants Alphys to sit with what was destroyed. Not the research, but the choice that destroyed it. In front of witnesses, with no institutional authority providing insulation. Alphys listens. Then he explains, and this is the part that costs him the most. His wife Irina did not die cleanly in the experiment. The memory transfer fractured something essential in her consciousness, and what Alphys sat with in the hours afterward was not a death he could grieve along clean lines. He burned the research, because looking at it meant looking at what it had become. The thing that had been their shared life's work turned into the mechanism of the worst night of his existence. He walked out, because staying meant existing alongside that fact, and he was 23 years old and incapable of it. He never reached the prison, because the arrest proceedings offered no channel for that distinction. The documentation recorded betrayal, because betrayal was simpler to process. Arcane's expression, across the bridge, moves through something that has no clean name. It is not forgiveness. It may be worse than that. The specific grief of a man who built 40 years of clear, functional fury around a story of deliberate betrayal and has just been handed a different story. Not a worse man than he believed, but a broken one who ran. That is smaller and more human and much harder to sustain fury toward. He has spent 40 years. He has nothing left to reshape this new information into. What Arcane does next is the act of a man who has lost the shape of the life he was living. He drops precision. The controlled hold he has maintained with surgical care across 400 students becomes something else. He opens the full scope of his zone and drives them toward the bridge's edge simultaneously, and the structural threat is immediate. The bridge was not designed for this load in motion, and beneath it is 30 feet of open air and cobblestone. Alphys responds. The spell he builds is called Big Bang, in the Academy's informal vocabulary, which is the name people give to things too large to describe technically. Light-based, at the scale of a localized weather event. It hits Arcane completely, and it works. The man goes down, zone collapsed, the toll of his own overreach already beginning to take him from the inside. He is not dead, he is dying. He knows it. And from the last measure of what remains in his zone, he pulls the threat back up. Because if this is where his life ends, he will choose the shape of the ending. This is where Siron starts running the numbers. He has been calculating since Alphys began building the light spell. Not the fight, the aftermath. The students. What it would take to move 412 bodies across enough distance to clear the bridge's structural limit before Arcane's last gesture completes. The honest answer is that no documented technique in his catalog covers that volume at that speed. The immortal function is not in his documented catalog. He has never used it. He has never trained it. He has read its theoretical description 3 times across 3 different sources. And he knows the mechanism, past the highest count, past the densest possible zone. There is a point where the counting itself becomes the barrier. You stop numbering. You step past the sequence into a domain his sources call nirvana. Not a spiritual term, but a mathematical one. The state beyond bounded quantities. In that domain, the constraints a physical body normally imposes become suggestions rather than laws, including the constraint of needing a beating heart to move. He tells Amy to take the others back. She is 6 feet to his right and has been watching him run the calculation for the past 90 seconds, with the expression of someone who already knows the answer and finds it unacceptable. She doesn't move. She asks what he's planning. He closes his eyes instead of answering. The sequential count starts low and climbs. He pushes faster than he ever has, past the interval patterns Aruki refined with him, past the logarithmic jumps he's been practicing at dawn since recovering from the bridge attack, into a range that has no useful reference point. His zone expands and densifies simultaneously. He can feel the students, not individually, but as collective weight and position in the surrounding space, the way he felt the cliff coordinates during the promotion exam, scaled by a factor he can't assign a number to. He reaches the ceiling of the count. He drops it. What happens across the next 11 seconds will later be described by Athela, watching from 30 meters away, as the most complete expression of the immortal function she has witnessed outside restricted source material. From inside, it is not describable in language built for physical experience. From outside, it is this. Siron moves once, with no visible transition, across a distance that covers the bridge and the courtyard below it, and the students are somewhere else, all of them, repositioned without sequential steps. And then he is kneeling on the stone on the far side of the bridge, and he is very still. His heart is not beating. Amy reaches him in seconds, 2 fingers to his neck, then her full palm to his chest. Nothing. Her face does something she does not have time to manage. She tells the nearest students to get the medical staff now, and her voice is level in the way that voices go level when the alternative is not available. Arcane dies 11 minutes later in the position he fell in. His zone unravels with him. The held students return to themselves in stages, disoriented, looking around at a courtyard that has rearranged without their knowledge. Canis, finding the man who raised him gone, and the servant contract dissolved, makes a new agreement with Jav in the minutes, while everyone else is occupied elsewhere. It is a cold-blooded, practical decision, made quickly, which is something Siron will eventually understand more about. The Academy's administrative process for a student presenting no vital signs has been designed for clarity and produces mainly argument. The head examiner, Ted, moves to declare the situation administratively resolved within 48 hours. He has a procedure. The procedure has a timeline. He follows procedures. Nate, Aruki, Amy, and Ryan, who arrives from the swordsmanship wing without his coat, still breathing hard from running, do not allow this. Their argument is technical, because they understand the audience. Aruki presents 3 documented precedents involving Mage states undetectable by standard instruments. Amy presents the entrance examination data, alongside the anti-magic diagnostic, demonstrating that Siron's zone structure does not conform to standard biological templates. Nate presents accounts from 41 students who observed the final event at close range, internally consistent in ways that exclude both fraud and hallucination. Ryan stands in the doorway of Ted's office and does not move. Ted looks at him for a long moment and decides the paperwork can wait another day. Siron lies in the medical wing with no heartbeat, no breath, and a zone signal that holds steady on every instrument beside the cot. Amy visits every morning. She sits in the chair beside his cot and reads her notes, textbooks, and occasionally his journal, which she replaces under the pillow where she found it when she hears anyone coming. She has not told anyone that, in the instant before he dropped the count, his face was calm. Not resolved, not resigned. Calm. She is still deciding what to do with that. Something in there is still running. He is in a space that is not dark, because darkness is an absence, and this is something different. There is no surface, no reference point for up or down. He exists without a body providing feedback, which is disorienting in the specific, intellectual sense rather than a frightening one, because his mind is functional, and inventory is what his mind reaches for first. No hands. Noted. No heartbeat. Also noted, location. Unclear and unlike anywhere his training has prepared him to classify. Voices arrive the way they have since early childhood. The low register of questions he stopped asking aloud by the time he was 10. Whether there was something in him that justified being left. Whether the distance he feels in some rooms is a property of him rather than the room. He listens without agreeing. He has heard these before. They do not improve with distance from the body. Then a different presence arrives. She carries herself with the ease of someone accustomed to being the most significant thing in any space she enters. She is not young and not old. She occupies an age that suggests she stopped counting years by the usual unit and switched to something else. She tells him she has been watching him for some time, warmly, as though this is a pleasant disclosure rather than an unsettling one. She says she is a god. She says the space they are in is the upper layer of Istus, the substrate beneath all visible reality, the point from which all dimensions extend. She built her own universe from this space, using techniques she developed across a century of research at the academy below. She could teach him to build one too. The price, she says, is a co-source, a consciousness at the same level as the builders, contributed rather than created. To make a universe, two must become the material. She is not asking, she is presenting. Siron is quiet for a moment. Then he asks her one question. He asks why, if she is genuinely a god, the extension magic she has been using since she appeared is running on a framework he read about in a second-hand library book on dimensional spatial theory. She takes a fraction of a second too long to respond. He tells her what she is. A mage, possibly the most capable one who has ever lived, certainly the most ambitious, but a mage. The space around them is not a divine domain. It is a sophisticated and enormous extension of a technique that anyone who reads the full restricted sources can find a theoretical basis for. The universe she built is real. The architecture is extraordinary. He understands, better than she expected, why she stayed rather than returned. He says, what she can't do is make him into something he hasn't chosen to be, because she couldn't do that with any of the students she watched from above either. She knows this. The offer was never about partnership. It was about resolution, one way or another. She looks at him with the expression of someone used to being understood, who is not comfortable with being understood all the way through. He starts the count. There is nothing to count from in this domain, which is precisely the problem. The sequential method requires sequence, and sequence requires a dimension to measure along. But he doesn't need the method itself. He needs what the method reaches. He knows the target, his body, a cot in the medical wing, the specific coordinates of a still chest and a running zone. He builds the arc in a language that isn't numbers exactly, but is close enough to what he's been practicing. The fastest thing that exists in any dimension the mage world has vocabulary for is light. He moves faster than that. He hits his own body from the inside, and his heart starts. He wakes on the 11th day. The lamp is low. Amy is in the chair beside the cot, reading his journal, which she replaces under the pillow the instant she sees his eyes open. Her hands are perfectly steady throughout this operation. Her expression requires visible effort to maintain. He says her name. She closes the journal and sets it on the table, and then puts her face in her hands for several seconds. He lets her. When she looks up, she is composed again. She tells him he has been extremely inconvenient. He says he knows. He apologizes. She tells him to drink the water on the table. He drinks the water. Nate arrives within the hour, apparently notified immediately, which he always is. A rookie appears 20 minutes later, assesses Siron's color and alertness against whatever internal diagnostic he runs, and announces the indicators acceptable. This is a rookie's version of relief, and the people who know him recognize it as such. Ryan comes later, still carrying one practice glove he forgot to remove, and sits on the edge of the cot without asking, because the ward nurse stopped managing visitors for this particular patient 4 days ago. Ryan says he's glad Siron is back. He says it in the tone he uses for things much larger than the words available. Siron is glad too. Some of the voices from the void still ring faintly, the way sounds heard in deep night persist into morning. He needs another day before he's certain he's fully back in himself. By the following evening, he is certain. Alphys visits on the second day and explains Miro's nature in the careful way of a man selecting what to carry openly. She was his student before the academy became what it now is. Extraordinary. The research group she founded, the rate she outpaced her teachers, the questions she insisted on asking past the point where the curriculum had answers. She left when she ran out of ceiling and built her own space to work in. She has been there since, watching the world below through its dimensional membrane, doing work no one below can verify or constrain. The Kurgo ruins on Galanti Island contain the first physical record of her research, the theoretical groundwork she laid before she ascended. Alphys wants to know what's in those records. He cannot go himself. He asks Siron, with the directness of a man who has spent his last available subtlety, to go when he's ready. Siron says yes. 2 weeks later, the review board processes his academic credit. The diagnostics from the medical wing, combined with the incident record, generate enough to satisfy the promotion requirements. And his zone data provides what technical language is needed to close the file officially. He is placed in Class 3, a rookie who allows no one in his immediate orbit to advance past him without a fight, has driven himself into Class 2 during the same period through what Nate describes as a genuinely alarming series of late nights. Canis and Aaron enroll as regular students. This is Alphys's decision, and it is simultaneously generous and strategic, which are not mutually exclusive. Canis treats every encounter with Siron's group as a competition he hasn't yet determined whether to win. Aaron watches from his usual careful distance, and what he's thinking, nobody including Canis can reliably determine. The academy is calmer, not healed. Alphys's history has been visible for 3 weeks, and that information sits in the institution the way a repaired fracture sits in bone, stable but present. The daily rhythm has returned, which is its own form of grace. The invitation goes out on a Tuesday. Siron's note to Amy says he is traveling to Galanti Island to investigate the Kurgo ruins per the headmaster's instruction, that Ryan and a classmate of Ryan's from the swordsmanship school will be accompanying him, and would she like to join. He writes 2 other versions before settling on this one, which sounds most like he is primarily asking about ruins. Her reply arrives the same afternoon. She says yes and includes a precise list of what she'll need to pack for an extended archaeological research visit. The list is 8 items. The 8th is a novel, which he files as a meaningful data point. Ryan's classmate is Tess, compact and efficient in the way of swordsmanship students who've been properly trained, with a dry running commentary that Ryan's louder personality somehow fits against perfectly. Ryan introduces her to Siron, with a formality that suggests the introduction has been rehearsed, and he is attempting not to let this show. Tess reads the situation, reads Ryan, and shakes Siron's hand with the expression of someone who has already worked out more than she's been told, and finds it privately entertaining. The 4 of them take the coast road to the port on a clear morning. The ferry crossing takes 2 days. The weather holds. The sea is calm enough that Amy reads her novel on the deck without the pages fighting her, and Ryan falls asleep in his chair within an hour of boarding and stays that way for most of the first day, which Tess regards with the equanimity of someone who has already discovered this about him. On the evening of the 2nd day, Galanti Island appears on the horizon. Rocky cliffs, a sheltered harbor, a working town built around trade and fishing, and somewhere inland, an ancient ruin that a former God student left behind before she outgrew the world. Nothing goes wrong on the water. It goes wrong almost immediately after they dock. Galanti Island has a surface and an underneath. The surface is what the ferry posters show: harbor markets, coastal trails, guest houses with views, the stone-walled old district where the Kurgo ruins access path begins. The underneath is Falcoa, who runs it. Falcoa controls the island's lope trade. Lope is a substance with enough demand and enough profit margin to fund private security, bought officials, and a personal organization large enough to make the local magistrate's decisions for him. Falcoa himself is a former mercenary, stocky, self-assured, with the specific confidence of a man who has spent years being the largest threat in any room he walks into. He is not accustomed to being opposed by people he hasn't specifically invited to oppose him. They encounter his operation on the 2nd afternoon. A girl near the harbor market is surrounded by 3 of his collection men. A debt arrangement she owes for a brother's borrowed funds. The men are not interested in negotiation. Siron steps in. This is not strategic. He sees it happening and his feet move. The collection men are not complicated opponents, and the intervention is brief. What is complicated is the woman who appears at the end of it, stepping out of the crowd with the ease of someone who was watching and has decided to be visible now. She looks at Siron for a moment longer than casual curiosity requires. Then she says something that takes him a moment to process. She says she's been looking for him. Marcia is not what the word criminal assembles in imagination. She is warm, genuinely, specifically warm, in the way of people who learned that warmth is worth maintaining after surviving something that made them question it. She buys Siron food while his friends are occupied elsewhere and talks to him across a small table in a harbor district tea house, with the directness of someone who has decided to skip most of the available distance. She says she knows something of his history. She doesn't explain how. She says she thinks of him as family, the way people who were abandoned figure out family from scratch, assembling it from whoever chooses to stay. She shares her own story in broad strokes: an orphanage, a group of people who became hers, a night when she could not protect them, and a life afterward built around not making the same error again. She carries this history the way structural materials carry load, not visibly, but everything resting on it. Siron listens carefully. He trusts the warmth. He notes, somewhere behind his sternum, the things she doesn't say. Falcoa's response to being opposed in his own harbor is not immediate. He waits until he has leverage, and then he uses it cleanly. Amy disappears from the group's guest house on the 3rd evening. Falcoa's message arrives 2 hours later. It is polite, the way demands, that don't expect resistance are polite. Amy is being held at his compound as a guarantee of cooperative behavior. The group is to leave the island. The 4 of them convene in the guest house room. Tess closes the window shutters. Ryan picks up his practice sword and puts it down again, then picks it up again. Aruki is not present, but Siron knows what Aruki would calculate, because Siron can run the same numbers. He says, they go in now, before Falcoa finishes deciding how much of a liability a hostage creates. Ryan says he was already standing. Falcoa's compound is not a fortress, but it is staffed accordingly. The elite guards he employs use Shama, the swordsman's equivalent of the spirit zone, an internalized body awareness state that makes them faster and harder to read than standard fighters. Ryan and Tess take these. Siron handles the magic-equipped perimeter security. The process is fast, because fast is the difference between a rescue and a negotiation. Amy is in a room on the compound's second floor, technically unharmed, wearing the expression she wears when she is approximately 15 seconds from doing something decisive without external assistance. She looks at Siron in the doorway and says she had 2 more minutes of patience remaining. He says he's sorry they cut it close. She says nothing to this, but her shoulders drop a half inch, which he recognizes. Falcoa is found in his main reception room, behind 2 guards who are now sitting on the floor. Siron explains, without raising his voice, that Amy Karmas is from House Karmas. He lets Falcoa work out the implications. The process of those implications crossing Falcoa's face is visible and not pleasant for him. Falcoa backs down. He does not back down graciously, because men like Falcoa do not have a gracious register for backing down. But he does it. The Kurgo Ruins entrance is a day's walk inland, through terrain that shifts from cultivated coast to dense highland, where the vegetation gets older, and the stone under it shows through differently, quarried shapes beneath root systems, angles too regular for erosion. They are not the only ones seeking access. A mercenary group has been camped at the ruins' outer perimeter for 2 weeks. Not Falcoa's people, a different outfit, operating under a separate contract, with the particular discipline of professionals rather than enforcers. They are also trying to get inside. The ruins' gate mechanism does not care about intent. It cares about the test. The gate offers 2 options: pass a combat and capacity evaluation on its measuring spheres, hitting a threshold score high enough to prove genuine power, or sacrifice one of the party, leave someone behind permanently. All others may pass. They try the spheres. Each of them performs well by any external standard. Ryan's Shama readings push into ranges the measuring device registers with a visible mechanical response. Tessa's outputs surprise even the mercenaries watching. Aruki's zone concentration hits a number that makes the mercenaries' leader recalculate something she thought she knew about academy students. Amy's Crimson Eye facilitates a pattern-reading feat the sphere wasn't designed to account for. None of them hit the threshold. The gate does not negotiate. Siron looks at the group. Ryan, Amy, Tess, the mercenaries who came in beside them because the trial required combined effort at one stage, and makes the only available decision. They leave, together. No one stays behind. The ruins stay sealed. Marcia's real name, delivered in an interrogation room in a government facility 300 kilometers away on the same afternoon, is Clay Marcia. She is classified as an A-rank wanted criminal. The record attached to her name uses the title The Corrupted Virgin, which is a mercenary classification for someone who led a legendary crew and then, in the eyes of the organization's ethics board, compromised its principles. The file notes she is currently at large, location unknown. The interrogating official reads this into the record. Marcia, in the chair across from him, listens with the mild patience of someone hearing a description of a person they know well. She confirms her identity and says nothing else. What the file doesn't contain is the specific conversation she had with Falcoa the previous week, the conversation in which she reminded him, in the comfortable tone of someone with complete leverage, that she knows every cowardly decision he made in the years they worked together. That she has been waiting to collect something from him since the night he ran, when running cost the group everything. She tells him she wants the boy, the one from the harbor. Falcoa does not enjoy being told what to do. He enjoys being reminded of his own history considerably less. The fire starts at Jess's family home on a Tuesday night. Jess is the boy Siron helped during the original harbor incident. Young, not trained for violence, working inside Falcoa's organization under pressure rather than choice, with a sister he's been trying to protect. He made his choice clearly after seeing what Siron's group did at Falcoa's compound. He stopped cooperating. This is the response. He gets out. His sister gets out. The house doesn't. He finds Siron on the coast road at dawn, covered in ash, with the specific expression of someone who has run out of ways to be surprised by the world. and is now simply in it. He tells them what happened. He tells them about Marcia's instruction to Falcoa. He tells them about the mercenary force Falcoa has been assembling. The group makes its preparations in 2 hours. Not complicated preparations. They are not carrying siege equipment. What they carry is each other, and what they know, and what they've survived already. They ride out before the second hour of morning has fully begun. The approach to the mercenary camp is through terrain that has been made into a network. Marcia's people, or the people Falcoa has contracted toward her ends, have laid magical traps along every viable path, the kind of invisible geometry that redirects, suppresses, and collapses options rather than announcing itself. Siren walks through 3 of them before identifying the pattern, and then he dismantles the network from the outside like pulling threads from a finished seam. They push through. What waits at the camp's edge is not a small operation. This is a mercenary company at full deployment, organized lines, experienced fighters, a command structure that has run operations like this before. And at the camp center, visible even from the tree line, the catapults. 4 of them, military grade, built for destroying fortifications rather than people, which means their range covers everything in every direction, and their ammunition is sized for walls. The camp is being readied. The order to fire has not been given yet. Siron stands at the tree line, with Ryan on his left and Amy on his right, Ash still on his boots from where they crossed through the burned-out edge of the road, and he looks at 4 catapults being cranked into position by people who have not yet seen them. The pause is about 2 seconds long.